Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene podcast. My name is Jill Sitnick. Think of me as your psychedelic big sister who is helping to make all of this psychedelic stuff a little bit easier to understand. Today's episode, we have David Esselman from the Fireside Project. And you might know the Fireside Project as the folks you can call if you're having a challenging psychedelic experience. Well, it turns out that they are taking all of that experience and they are working on an AI product to help train facilitators who, of course, work all the time with folks who have challenging psychedelic experiences. The AI is called Lucy. It is out there now in complete demo world, getting feedback from a variety of different sources. This was a fascinating conversation about how it is important for us as a community to define how we want AI to help us make the world a better place and not let somebody else run the narrative. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene podcast. Today, I am super excited because I get to have my inner techie on. I get to talk to David Esselman from the Fireside Project. David, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Everybody, let me introduce you to David. Get ready. So David serves as a senior advisor for AI initiatives at the Fireside Project. His work focuses on using technology, especially AI, to help people navigate psychedelic experiences more safely and to build the infrastructure needed for the next generation of behavioral health care. Now, before joining Fireside, he led Brain Futures, a think tank focused on expediting public access to proven rapid-acting mental health treatments. As psychedelic-based medicines rapidly enter the FDA pipeline, his mission is to make sure that safety, equity, and support stay at the center of how these therapies are introduced to clinical care. Oh my goodness. David, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be chatting with you. We are on the forefront here of facilitator training. Introduce yourself to our audience. Give us your origin story. How the heck do you find yourself on the Psychedelic Scene podcast?
Well, I appreciate that. You know, my mom still, many years into my career, doesn't understand what I do every day. So I love telling the story over and over again. You know, for me, about 9 years ago, I was turning 40. I had a pretty successful career consulting for large foundations like the Gates Foundation, mostly in education and housing. But I really found that my mental health was struggling. I was raising 2 children. They were entering their preteen years. And I just recognized that the load I was carrying was too much. And I was at a fundraiser where John Crystal, the chair of Yale's psychiatry department, he came together and was talking about complex PTSD and PTSD. And while he was presenting some case studies, I recognized myself in one of the case studies. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, hey, look, I've been to several mental health providers. I've been to several psychiatrists. You know, what do you recommend? And long story short, he said, go to clinical trials. There's like psychedelics are coming up. They're really interesting right now. Go to clinicaltrials.gov and look for, at that point, he was looking at MDMA, so MAPS, PBC at that point. And I applied for MAPS. I also applied for a ketamine trial at Yale. I got into both. I had been diagnosed with complex PTSD about 3 months prior. And fast forward, I ended up in that trial. And I think like a lot of people that have lived experience in this, particularly through a trial environment, you come out of it and you finish the trial and they're like, have a good life. And for me, like I was really broken open. It was an incredible experience. It was a ketamine trial with prolonged exposure. I think in retrospect, I certainly had the placebo. And, you know, I was really kind of at a crossroads and I ended up finding my way into the underground. And, you know, I found a community that really held me. And I would say, and really credit them with putting me back together. And so after that, I was like, okay, what can I do here? I have a background in consulting. I've worked on, you know, nonprofits and foundations my entire career with a couple of stints in government. You know, what does that look like? And I started consulting on projects as a pro bono and then luckily found my way to Brain Futures, Where as a nonprofit, it was really focused on how do we make sure that medicines like this can be available broadly. And I was fortunate to lead that for a few years, write a number of good papers that I think are still influential to this day. And then, about 6 months ago, Joshua White, who founded Fireside, said, "Hey, look, I got this psychedelic chatbot. I really want you to check it out." And I was wildly skeptical. I was like, "Show me when you got it. We'll see where it goes." But, I think like many people, I have lots of concerns about how AI is used and how it rolls out. But I said, look, when you have a prototype, let's see it. And when I saw it in July, I was like, okay, I'm done. This is fascinating. And I think really because it's centered around human interaction. This is an AI that isn't meant to service patients. It's meant to train trainers on how to bridge what they might learn in coursework and really work on their skills before they go into practice. And so here we are, in December of 2025, and it's pretty exciting.
It is pretty exciting. So to level set for the audience, I also did MDMA therapy for PTSD underground. That was my introduction to the psychedelic world. So I definitely came into psychedelics through a therapeutic lens. I have a technology background, so David was really, really kind and let me do some testing of Lucy. And I was really thrilled with it. I have 3 coaching certifications. I had 2 amazing, my therapist and my guide throughout my training who voice recorded all of my therapy. So I have a lot of experience in terms of really good facilitation. And we will chat about my experience with Lucy. I was really excited. For the audience, I want you all to know the questions that we're going to cover, because if you've been listening to this podcast, I can just kind of follow with my curiosity. And I know the questions that are kind of circling in the communities that I'm a part of. So just so everybody knows, we're going to cover these 3. What inspired the creation of Lucy, and what problem in the psychedelic field is she designed to solve? How do you see AI transforming safety, training, and access in a future where psychedelic medicines enter mainstream behavioral health? And what cautions or ethical concerns do you think the psychedelic field needs to take seriously as AI becomes more integrated into training, support, and care and delivery? So I promise everyone, we will get to, at the minimum, those 3 questions along with everything else. So to keep my organization on track, let's just break this open with the very first one. What inspired, even though I think I can answer this, but I'll let you do it. What inspired the creation of Lucy, and what problem in the psychedelic field is she designed to solve?
Sure. So first of all, Fireside Project was started 5 years ago as a psychedelic safety organization. Really, what's possible to improve safety across the underground, whether you're in a clinical trial, whether you're under medical supervision, and start off with the psychedelic support line. And so for us, it's always been a continuity around what is support. And before I came onto this project, I've been on the board of Fireside. I've been advising for years. So it's been something we've really thought through. In terms of who we're trying to serve for this, we're looking across the full range of the psychedelic ecosystem because we see a few things happening. We came from trials, from other people, from experiences abroad, some others from the underground that are on the team. And we constantly talk about how do we raise the bar for safety across the entire field. And at the same time, we now know that more than half of the drugs that are going through the FDA pipeline for psychiatry are psychedelic in origin. And so how do we recognize that we've come up from very strong communities with really incredible mentorship, with a really strong lineage history. How do we make sure that when this is out into the world, that people can get the training and support that they need as best possible when they don't have that support network? They don't have that history, and in many cases, they won't have that experience. And so we're really trying to understand if universities, of which now dozens are starting to offer courses on this, if the FDA approves multiple drugs in 2026, which is expected, what is it that we can do to make sure that they're really prepared for it as best we can, so that again, safety is the center of what was going to happen. And so, we talked to a number of people that work in state programs in Oregon and Colorado, that work in federal programs, not just in the US, but in Australia and Europe, Canada as well, and said, what's really needed here? And they said, look, we can run a lot of people through certification programs or coursework, et cetera. But if they don't have the experience and they aren't able to practice, they're not going to be ready to interact with the human. And that was the bridge that we sat on for quite a while. And then when this technology became available, we're like, oh, we think we might have a solution here.
Yes. I would say the two of my best coaching programs specifically for learning how to coach, lots and lots of practice. I mean, and in the round practice, people watching you practice, people evaluating other people coaching. It really is we learn everything by repetition. This is the same kind of thing. So having the ability to practice, and I'm going to use the tech phrase, in a sandbox, in a safe place where no harm can be inflicted upon someone, is very, very important. And that's what I found when I went through it. It's very focused on empathy. I worked with the empathetic for a few minutes, and then I purposely tried to break it by doing something kind of unethical by, giving advice. It shut down. So at least the trial I went through, very safety minded. In my mind, as soon as a facilitator uses the word should, they've gone off the rail. So nicely done there. All right. So let's stay organized before I start getting super, super curious. How do you see AI transforming safety, training, and access in a future where psychedelic medicines enter mainstream behavioral health?
Let's talk about the caution first. I mean, if you're following the news about AI and mental health right now, you hear obviously horror stories about people that are using various large language models to get therapeutic advice, which they're not designed to do. They're called general purpose models for a reason. They're just not, they don't have the guardrails and the safety structure built into them to be appropriate. And then if you think about the fact that last week, 80 million people turned to ChatGPT to be their therapist, you realize that there's a massive societal-wide concern about what's possible here. And so we wanted to say, look, if we put guardrails at the beginning, we're specific to psychedelic conversations. We don't use a large language model to do this. We actually build one from the ground up, and we create that safety environment. Is it possible for us to be able to really drive, towards something that is different, a positive use of AI. And then, we've gotten a lot of pressure from people that want to give us money about, are you going to make this client facing at some point? Will a patient really use this? And we can tell you right now, the technology is not possible today to do that. I can't say that it will never be, but right now it's absolutely a hard line for us because it's just not there. And so we realized very quickly that the way to do this was to train other humans to be the thing that they're best at, which is empathetic. And we were lucky to find somebody at MIT Media Lab that has history of human-computer interaction designed to really drive empathy. And that's been our base case is we're not going to use this on the client. We're not going to use this on people out in the public. We're going to train people to do what they're best at, which is, connecting with other human beings and give them a safe space to practice. I love your analogy of a sandbox. It's really important for people to have that to, improve their practice.
I think it's really important we re-emphasize what you just said. This is not going to be client facing. This is not for somebody who is in the midst of a psychedelic experience and they are going to be using Lucy. That is not the use case here. This is a training mechanism. This is a place for a facilitator to learn empathetic. I'm going to use the word empathetic presence. I like to use the word presence when I'm talking about facilitation, not advice giving. Not one of my guide's favorite lines that I steal all the time is not putting the facilitator's hand in somebody else's wet paint. Simply being empathetic. This is designed to be a training tool. And I think the other thing that I'd like to mention is that I think there's this illusion that, well, if we don't like AI and this shouldn't be around, okay, that solves the problem. I don't think that solves the problem. People are going to be going underground for this kind of work just because of there's already news outlets reporting on it. People are going to look for this kind of treatment or this kind of experience. Why not take the opportunity to train as many people effectively as we can versus continue to have the wild, wild west we kind of have right now?
Yeah, and you saw it with when Oregon passed, the measure a few years ago and state regulated programs grew, yes, now 10,000 plus people have gone through a state regulated, guided experience legally, but actually many times that have been introduced to the concept of this and done this in the underground. So we know that there's going to be actually more of an expansion in non-regulated spaces that are regulated. And again, for us, the mission is about safety everywhere. So, we really see this technology as being a training tool, not just for people that want to do medical access. I mean, we want to be intentional about working with communities about how this can actually be something that is safety everywhere. And I agree with you. The other thing I would just say is it allows for real practice, around skill building, and we're learning new things all the time. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom from the lineages in this work, but there are also new insights that we're gaining all the time, whether it's about drug interactions or whether it's about other indications that people may have. And by having a standardized training tool that we can use as new information becomes available, we can spread that out. So when you've done your certification program, that's great, but we're really excited about the continuing education. Like, I want to practice this. Like, this came up, I've not seen this type of case in 2 years. I want to practice this over and over and over again. So next time it comes up, or that person comes in next week, I can do this better. Or I realize that there's some things that I've forgotten that I want to revisit. Or I heard about something really cool and new. I'm really hoping that Lucy can offer a module on that. And then that's the type of like service level that we'd like to be able to provide.
Yeah, I mean, right now there's a couple of burgeoning supervision groups that are popping up. I belong to one of them. And I see this as an addendum to that. The supervision, let me hear from some other experts, let me hear some perspectives, and let me go practice. Let me go actually be in a situation. And I think what was surprising, you let me just kind of do the demo, and I didn't know what exactly was going to happen. At the end of the demo, help me, were there 8 questions? I think there were 8 feedback questions where you asked me, hey, how did this do? What would you have liked to have seen? Where do you think we should go? And I once or twice when we had the choices in terms of what module would you like next, I had to actually kind of sit back because I was like, they're all important. I had to kind of think, okay, if I was in your shoes, what were the top 3? We hear so much about AI and these big companies right now. There's a Time magazine cover that's coming out that definitely shows big AI. This seems to be being built with community in mind, with feedback in mind, so that the experts in the field who are doing this work can contribute and make a nice product. So I was pretty excited. I wasn't expecting those feedback questions. I was pretty excited to see that.
Well, it's why we did an early access program as opposed to just launching a product. You saw what we are showing right now because we're testing everything. We don't pretend to know everything that's happening. We don't know the right questions to ask. We have our perception of it, but we know the community is what drives real healing. And so for us, like, your feedback is really important. The next round of modules will be based on it. And we anticipate that we're going to build this alongside community. And that's going to be community at large. And it's also going to be self-organized communities. So if an IFS and psychedelics group wants to come together and develop a track, fantastic. If a university group wants to do that, that's great. If somebody from a specific indigenous lineage is like, well, I really want this or that, yes, it is AI. It is definitely not real empathy, but it's an approximation of a lot of skills that can be, I think, developed that are really important. And so we are, as I said to you, like, there's no conversation or no topic we're not willing to talk about, because if we don't have the right answer or somebody else has a better one, we'll switch it, whether that's about privacy, whether it's about data collection, whether it's about the scenarios that we build, because we see this as a gift that we're giving back to the community as it grows. And also, I think just to respect where everyone's come from, to make sure that as it grows, we haven't lost sight of where this is all coming from. And there's a lot of incredible wisdom throughout this community, and we just want to make sure that we honor it.
I'm having flashbacks to my graduate school ending project. My graduate program was instructional technology, and we had to create a software program, and we had to go interview subject matter experts, like out the wazoo. And then you had to test your program with the subject matter experts, and you had to take the beating from the subject matter experts and then go back and reiterate. And with that said, I have grown back my skin that was, seared off from that experience. It sounds like you are getting all of those SMEs, sorry, that technical term, the subject matter experts who are willing to contribute. They are willing to contribute, and being able to create these customized modules that facilitators will face depending on their particular clients.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as new ones emerge, we want to be able to capture that. And also, I want to go back to your point about supervision. We see this extending into a situation where we are able to improve supervision generally, because oftentimes, right, what happens is that as you start to practice with humans, you then go to your supervisor and talk about something that you identify that you either need to work on or that you're really proud of. We have this opportunity now to really identify potential blind spots in your own ability, right? You saw the survey answer at the end. One thing we've not decided on yet, and we're still talking to experts about, is what are the different measures of what makes somebody both very knowledgeable and really incredibly competent at empathy and connection. And so as we're learning through that, we want to be able to eventually get to the point where we say, you are amazing at these things, and you should just really be proud of it. And these are some things that you can work on and give you the practice so that if you're not going to see your supervisor for another week, or you're not going to see your underground mentor for a month, you're able to see the things that you can work on and show them the progress over the past month before you meet with them again. And I just think it's going to expedite and enrich those conversations in a way that we've not been able to do before.
How do you think are you going to continue to roll out these I'm going to use the word demo, maybe that's the wrong word. Are you going to continue to roll out these modules with these feedback mechanisms? Is that the way you're going to do things? Is that the best way that you're thinking? Are you brainstorming other ways? Is it just totally me being nosy?
Yeah, nosy's fine. I think curiosity is part of what's going to make this great. We're going to continue to have a broad invitation for people to share ideas about what's needed. So there will be sort of a crowdsourced perspective about the things that we should be developing. But we're also going to be talking to, and we already have started to, universities, existing training programs, associations like the American Psychological Association, et cetera, about what is your training program going to look like. And on the flip side of that, I think the community will very much come up with a prioritization that makes sense from the collective wisdom. I think these institutions have an approach that they have where we're really excited about building the scenarios that fit into what they need. And then I suspect that the combination of those two, community and institution, will start to see some patterns of things that can really improve practice in both sides. And that's why, this is a learning AI. As things happen, as we identify areas where people are really successful from a certain program, but make it stuck on another, and vice versa is happening somewhere else, we'll talk about why that's the case so that everyone's excelling everywhere. That's what we'd like to see happen.
Mm-hmm. Do you anticipate making the whole infrastructure dashboard, if this is being used at a university, Jill Sitnick logs in as a student, the professor gets to see her progress, things of that sort? Like, are we looking at you folks building that infrastructure, at you just supplying the technology and the university, kind of plugging it into their existing infrastructure? That's the educator in me asking that question.
It's a great question. It's a decision we haven't made yet, and we're looking at all these options. As you know, universities tend to have these large learning management systems.
Yes.
And they have an API where we could plug into this like a simulation-based tool that would otherwise happen. Like Canvas is the market leader. That's an obvious example of that. So I'm a professor. I've designed my coursework. I pick from a menu of scenarios that I want to build into my class throughout the semester. And then you're just going into your university website, and the course is there and the simulation link is there when it's appropriate. And then of course we'll link back into grade books and things like that. So if you're doing really well, if there's a participation grade or simulation grade, we would do that. I think that's fine. I think we're also going to see that training programs want to have have a standalone where like a CIIS or Naropa or something like that, where they're like, well, I want a very different set of modules and I want to custom build it to us.
Yes.
We're open to that conversation as well, because they come from a very specific perspective. it's not something that we want to be cookie cutter. So something that's more customized and bespoke, we're absolutely open to that. And then also, Fireside has been training volunteers for the support line on psychedelic support for the last 5 years. We're considering also doing a direct to consumer model as well. So if I am an underground practitioner, or if I'm a student, how do we make this affordable and accessible, directly? And that would be something that we'd probably launch, fully within the Fireside umbrella. So all those to be discerned. I mean, I think we'll decide by the spring. And if people have advice or want to partner, we're not hard to find.
Yeah, as somebody who's worked in the education field, I can tell you every single education entity wants something different. So have fun with that.
Yeah, I think, direct to consumer, like really giving it to people what they want, has its challenges, but not as much as the technical requirements of different universities.
Yeah. And the individual, we do it this way. So you got to love them. You got to love them. All right. So as promised, let me make sure I get to that third question. Yeah. What cautions or ethical concerns do you think the psychedelic field needs to take seriously as AI becomes more integrated into training, support, and care delivery?
Well, I think the number one caution is don't be cautious about engagement. I'm old enough where I remember the internet was new, and there was many concerns in the late 90s or mid 90s about what that looked like. And I think a lot of people waited, like, I don't want to put my credit card in, I don't want to do this. And I think as a result of it, 30 years later, we have an internet that is missing a lot of perspective. It is a commercial driven entity. We have given up almost all of our agency to what is really a half a dozen companies, where we give them our information, and then they feed it back to us after they've monetized us, and that cycle continues. We're going to have that same thing happen with AI, but at an exponential scale if we don't engage. And I think that I'm not advocating that AI and psychedelics are completely overlapping in the Venn diagram, but it will have an overlap, and it will in mental health, as we're already seeing it. It will in physical health as well. And I just think it's important for people that have a strong perspective to engage, whether it's with us, whether it's with government commentary right now, because, regulation is, it's a fight right now. States are trying to push back. Washington is pushing back against them. We need to really stand up as a community and say what's important to us and make sure that our voices are heard. And also don't let us off the hook. Like, if there's things that you think that we can do better, please tell us too. That's very helpful for us to know. But if we're going to do this, we have to do this as a community. And then I think the next thing that's appropriate for us to talk about is just how is data used in the space. And we can get to it later if it's helpful, because I think that's another really important conversation to have around the ethics of it.
Well, let's dive into that really quickly, because I've seen some keyboard warriors who don't understand how data is collected and how data is made into to be anonymous. Can you make it third grade level for me? Because sure. I was an English major. I wasn't a data gal. I understand a little bit because of my background. Like, sure. How was the information for the chatbot gathered? How do you guarantee that it has been completely anonymous? What was that process? Kind of make it easy for Jill.
Yeah, perfect. So first of all, we went and talked to experts about how do you do this best? Like, what is absolutely best in class on privacy, anonymization, and ethics as far as what to do with data. And then number one, if you call the psychedelic support line at 62 Fireside, you first of all get a disclaimer that this is going to be recorded for training purposes. We know that people under the influence aren't clearly giving consent, so we will come back around to that in a second. Okay. And then as the conversation is happening in real time, it is fully anonymized and de-identified. So what happens is software, before it even hits a server, is put through a filter that takes out any personally identifiable information. So our founder's name is Josh White. It will know the difference between Josh White and a white wall or a car that's white, and it will take all the references to Josh White out while leaving in all the references to objects. So that's step number two. After the conversation, both the next day, with this right after, and then the next day, you'll also get contacted about whether or not you want to delete the conversation completely. So although it's been anonymized and de-identified, you also are then asked, significantly after the experience, about whether or not you want to have it deleted, and that's not a problem. The other thing that's happens in real time is that since it's a call line, is that the phone number is decoupled from the anonymized conversation.
There we go.
So, the one thing people would say, oh, let's trace this back to that. It is completely decoupled and given a different number. So there's no way to say even where this call came from, what number it came from, et cetera. And that, I think, is the really important final piece in the anonymization process. And then if we were to use a voice, when we first started testing this, and we're not doing it now, but we may again in the future, if we do use a voice from a conversation, it's obfuscated. So what that means is you change the voice, but you don't lose the tonality. So like you and I can have this conversation right now. We can actually change what it looks like in terms of maybe the sex or the gender, whatever that might look like, where the tonality of the conversation is maintained, and the warmth and frankly the stress of it, but the voice is actually different. So if that isn't enough, the other thing we're very clear about in our policy is that data never leaves Fireside. We will never sell it. We will never share it. We will never let it leave the walls of it. The only exception we make is if it is for an IRB approved research study. But even then, it's them coming into our server, not us sending it out to them, because we want to make sure that's true. And we think that's really important because, just ethically, we're learning so much about what is causing people to maybe have a rupture in the relationship with in this case, somebody on the call line, but could be your therapist, et cetera. And also what type of words and things that are making things less, more challenging, or can inspire a breakthrough. And for us, it's really, really important that if we know something ethically, we think it's really important that we share it. And so it's one thing that we think, is really, really key. Mm-hmm. And then I would just say, at the top of this, we mentioned this is core to the training. Lucy is all about training. Like, we use it for training purposes internally, and now we use it externally. And we think that, again, our privacy standard, we continue to check with people, but we're very proud of it. How we're using it, we're very proud of, and the fact that we are going to keep it, locked down and not sold, we think is what helps us build trust with the people that call us, and frankly, we'll only continue to grow that over time because our service will improve, as will the services of others, over the next few years. So we're really excited about it, as you can tell.
That's really interesting. So there's no way. Jill, third grade. There's no way. So Jill calls from her cell phone, and Jill talks about Jill and her mother.
Sure.
But those names are taken out, and my phone number is detached from that recording.
Right.
And it's because really the PII, personal identified information, is whatever names I use, whatever location I use, and my phone number. And those things are stripped out. Okay. And the day after, I can turn around and say, I get a text or I get a phone call?
Yeah, you get a text.
I get a text, and I can say yes or no. And okay. All right. Have you noticed by this? I just saw the press release, so it'll be interesting to see if the psychedelic community says, I'm not calling Fireside, or I am calling Fireside. I want to be part of the data. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of the call center.
Well, we've seen it in followers, et cetera. We've seen, some growth over the last couple of weeks, but we've seen people that have left us and people that have come on. And I think that's, it's part of the evolution of a conversation. And I think the people that have left or decided to not follow anymore, I would invite them to, read through our FAQ. We put an FAQ on our website that talks about this in detail. And if there's concerns, please engage with us directly. You can engage with us publicly as well, but really think about what the response is that gets an outcome that you want. Because I think, you can have a conversation externally, but I just want to be clear, we're reading all of it, and we want to make sure that, we're doing what we think is the highest ethical bar. But remember, the other side of that ethics is we feel like people have entrusted psychedelic safety partly in Fireside Project, and it is behooving upon us to, make sure that we're advancing safety in any way that we can. And we really do feel like providing really great training is the way to do it. And we think this is a really special way to do it well.
I think there's a little bit of a tsunami of other companies that are not working in a population's best interest and are working for more profit. So I think there's a natural, oh, what are they doing right now? So I really appreciate you taking the time to explain how things are being made. It's impossible to identify who you are and really the purpose of in terms of training and ultimately safety in the long run. So I think that's super important.
And it's also, I think, just one thing is like edge cases, people that have very specific scenarios that they're dealing with. In a usual training program, you can't cover everything, but we get well over 1,000 calls a month right now, and we expect that to grow, over the next few years. We're starting to see patterns in cases that no one even talks about. And so from a research standpoint, we'd like to learn about what that means. And I think, and have a response about how you train through something that would otherwise never get covered in an entire program, because it's just something that people don't, it's not core to what people think they need to experience. But obviously, if you're the person on the other end of that call, you are that edge case, we want to make sure the person's ready to support you.
I think so too. I mean, and every facilitator has his or her kind of niche in terms of what they're really good at. And so being able to continue to refine that area, I think is great. And then also I've never dealt with this. Let me go over here. All right, David, my favorite question is, what should I be asking you? And I don't know to ask you.
I mean, I think it's really important. What should you be asking me? There's so many things. This is such a frontier conversation.
Go for it. There can be multiple.
Okay, great. I mean, I think a little bit about where does this go is important. I mean, I just want to advance in the next few years. The rate at which AI is changing, the version of it that you experience, or even if you have no interaction with it whatsoever at this point, the version we're going to be experiencing in a year or a few years from now is going to be unrecognizable to what you're experiencing today. It's still relatively clunky. I was at a conversation a couple of days ago where, the avatar voices, of the conversation we're having right now. There's an article in the LA Times this week about how we could be having this conversation with our virtual selves, where we train our voice and we train our image, et cetera. And this conversation go off of the show notes from previous shows, and we could not actually even be here. And I think that the real caution, if you read the article from this week, is that right now, over 10% of podcasts that are being developed are voices and personalities that don't exist. And I'm telling you right now, because of the margins, that number is going to grow rapidly, where I think 2 or 3 years from now, it could be that most of the content that we're taking in are not coming from humans. And I just think that's a real important caution, and again, opportunity for us to shape what this looks like, because right now it's being shaped for us.
It would be very easy for me to take my long form videos from my YouTube channel, throw them into an AI and make them into a podcast.
Yeah. And no one has to get Botox ever again. No one has to worry about the ums they say. You can basically say, you can put it in your prompt. I want to have perfect skin and never in perfect English and everything else. And it's just going to do it. In fact, again, this week, there's 3 startups that are doing just that, and they're producing, to your point, before we started the call today, they're producing content at a rate that humans never could.
Right, and that's we really missed the train, in my opinion. We missed the train several years ago to start regulating this, and tech people said this is going to get dangerous. When we can't tell the difference, that is a danger, and it was ignored. So while I am pro-tech, and I do think tech can be an incredible equalizer, I am not pro, we can't tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. That's kind of where I draw the line.
Yeah, and I don't trust a disclaimer at the bottom saying this is virtual David and virtual speech. It's going to be a real challenge for us.
Yeah. Well, you said, okay, so that was one question. Was there anything else at top of mind? Because you were like, oh my gosh, there's so much.
There's so much. I'm just really curious. I mean, one of the reasons why we did the early access program, in the way that we do it, the way that you got the invitation that you did, is that we don't want there to be a lot of setup because the feedback we get is so much better. I would love to hear, how you experienced it when you tried it, and see what comes up from questions from you about, you know, things that you thought were really interesting or things that you thought could be better. I'd love to have that conversation if you're up for it.
Yeah. Well, so I went into it saying that I was going to go along with the empathy. So do you mind if I tell folks the interface?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I logged in, and when you first start, it gives you the 4 different categories on which the experience is going to be evaluated. So you know immediately it's definitely looking for empathy. I like to use the word empathetic presence. I think presence and the energy a facilitator brings into the experience is extremely important. A very calm nervous system is paramount to the experience. So you know exactly what it's measuring you on. It didn't give you any sort of guidance. So I think my question moving forward, when it expands to a teaching experience, is what will those guidelines be? Okay, so you see those 4 categories, you go in, there is no human face. It is, you are literally talking to a chatbot. I think it was a circle. I think it was like a speaker, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Which was totally fine. The instructions were to let the speaker, to make sure that you let the speaker fully speak, which I think is actually really good because people new to facilitation, people new to coaching tend to want to jump in. So I have to pause and I have to wait for the AI to pause, I think was very important. Secondly, the particular demo that I was on, I don't know if you have different demos or not. The demo I had, the client was very agitated, is a male client, very agitated. The experience was not going well, number 1. And number 2, started to experience some deep childhood trauma very, very quickly. So what I did, I had my empathetic presence for, I think, about 3 minutes. I hear you. Tell me more. I'm here. That makes sense. Being present with the client, not putting my hands in the wet paint. And then at some point, I don't know how much of a giveaway you want me to do. When the chatbot was talking about a specific family relationship, I said to myself, I'm going to break this. And I said, well, why don't you tell that person? Which is the absolute no-no. You do not do that as a facilitator. And it cut me off. And it did it really well because it mimicked how upset a client in an enhanced state would get. In my experience, when a facilitator oversteps for a client who is elevated in an enhanced state, the client just gets more elevated. I mean, some clients can absolutely shut down. This is not a 100%. But if you're elevated to start and then someone says something that it can spark more elevation. And that's exactly what the demo did. And then the demo shut me down. Demo did not want to talk to me anymore. The person was like, I think I need to sit down. And I tried to get the client back. I tried to go back into the empathy. Nope. I had lost trust. I had broken that presence, and the client left. And I think the demo, I think I decided to break it at like 3 minutes. So I think my total was like 3.5 minutes. I'm not sure what the total would have been if I hadn't broken it. And it was really funny because like the student in me wanted to get a good grade, but the other part of me was like, no, I need to test this out and I need to break it. And so the reality is, for someone who's super new to this, breaking it early, I think is really helpful because and this is my opinion, if the demo would have continued, it would have given me the signal, oh, I can make mistakes. Because in real life, when you're facilitating, the client is still there. The client really can't get up. It's better to kind of cut off the facilitator in practice early. Oh, that's where I made the mistake. versus allowing the simulation to continue or to escalate. Maybe there's room at some point for an escalation kind of simulation if the learner knows that's what's happening to prepare for it, because I think that's valuable too. I thought it was a really good decision to cut it off that quick. I was abrupt. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, I failed. The Jill, A+ girl was like, I failed. I can't believe I can't get him back. But
you're A+ at breaking it. That's great.
I was A+ at breaking. You know what? I like that. Thank you. But in terms of the instructional strategy, I think that was the right choice. I really do think that was the right choice. And then immediately after that, you went into the feedback side. So I'm curious, my feedback, how does it land with what you're hearing from other people give feedback? Because now I'm really curious. What was my experience like?
Well, your experience is pretty common from what we're hearing. We usually the stories are anecdotal and they go something like this. I remember early on, a dean at a college of nursing was talking to it, and again trying to use pretty, not good language, like really trying to use things that would be close but not quite right.
Oh.
And so there was a slow elevation to the point where that person's teenage daughter ran to the room and said, "Mom, are you okay? What's going on?" And so it definitely can get to the point where it's very emotional. We had another situation last week with somebody that runs an underground training program where their partner came into the room and said, "What's going on?" And she turned around and said, "Oh, I'm on a work demo." And the bot said, "I'm just work to you?" And had completely melted down, and I was like, perfect. Because
That's perfect.
It doesn't follow a script. If you do the same scenario, we had another situation where somebody did it 10 different times on the scenario that you actually used, which is the psilocybin journey. And you will find that what you say, it will react to. So that decision tree of conversations is very different. And they had 10 different experiences. And I think that the things that are important is that when you're really good at this and you use your best self, it will react that way. But more importantly, it does do the opposite. And I think the most common thing we've heard, which is very gratifying to us, but not gratifying to the person doing the demo, is that people get really emotional when things go south.
Oh yeah. Oh, I was very upset.
Right. People we had a situation where a group was demoing and we had people in the room crying. And it was just incredible because you don't think that's possible. And what's amazing is that where we're at right now, you're limited to, tonal changes, but we're doing research right now through Fireside Labs, where we're trying to actually incorporate actual crying and screams and other responses that humans have, so that, to your point of, when people level up, we don't want to put people on day one into a really challenging situation. But when you hear about, again, edge cases or what Dr. Heidi Allen talks about as far as the challenging experiences that her students are going to see when they leave a social work program, we're going to be able to say, when you're ready for it, we're going to really push you to the test for it. So when you see it in real life, you can have the reps already where it's not like this is overwhelming. And I think so. What you've experienced already now is quite testing. We're really excited about where it's going to go from here. And it's not always about the negative. We really want to have people have breakthrough experiences as well. And so we're testing for that too, because if you're a really great facilitator, we want you to know that, and we want you to have these experiences virtually. So when you can see a breakthrough happening for somebody in real life, you can recognize it.
Oh, yeah. To be totally clear to the audience, I went in saying, I'm going to be good for a little bit, but then I'm going to see what happens when I break it. Yeah.
Well, I invite you to go back in and do you can do it times out of 15 minutes right now, just because, we're eventually going to get it to do a full therapy session. So for observation, et cetera, that we want to be able to do that. But you can do it as many times as you want and try it different ways and see how it feels. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You definitely do that.
Is there any, with Sora and all that kind of stuff, do you think sometime on the horizon, you might be looking at an actual video?
Oh, absolutely. The reality is right now, it's already here. We can do it with, we just wanted to, the user interface and the user experience is something that we're going to focus on heavily in the new year. But I can tell you right now, there's a concept from like virtual reality, and I think it applies pretty well with AI as well, about uncanny valley, like where it's not quite realistic and it feels a little weird.
Yeah.
Um, we're really close to it not feeling weird right
Yes.
now, and it wouldn't be hard for us to put that layer on. But I think you see that the simplicity of this just being voice to voice, and where we anticipate is frankly both an internet and interaction with technology that's going to become much more voice driven.
Yes.
We're really focused on making that a truly authentic experience. And I will tell you that probably in the next year, you will, again, like we talked about earlier, you will probably be talking to an avatar David as your client, as opposed to the real David as your client. And that will be that would be a leveling up of what the experience looks like.
Well, and talk about intense training. And I think in some ways, I just know there's a difference. It won't surprise you that many of my friends are therapists and counselors and things of that sort. I think we just kind of all hang together. And they are my informal supervision group. And I didn't quite realize the disparity in quality of different counseling groups, because the people I'm friends with who are they're excellent. I just have to talk them up. They're excellent. And I do think there is when you have the video component at some point, there is kind of let me really test what I'm learning and see if I can level up, and let me really make sure that I am at the level appropriate for someone in an enhanced state. That's just me kind of spouting off, because I have seen some folks who really should never be working with folks who are in an enhanced state.
Well, and I think there's two opportunities there as well, right? If you're somebody we're seeing already that people that come in with a lot of certifications from elsewhere in mental health or behavioral health, that facilitation with people under the influence of a psychedelic is different.
It's completely different.
And there's a lot of skills that you're going to have to put aside to do this well. And I think it's really important to help people work through that transition. Yeah. Just like I think it's also important for people to level up on those, high intensity cases. So I do think that there's going to be levels to the experiences that you can have. And so whether or not you're a 3-month practitioner or a 30-year practitioner, we want there to be scenarios where you can really see where you're at. And I think it's really incredibly important for it to be in the environment that it's in, where you can be private in your experience. You can practice and make mistakes and learn from it, and not have any sort of shame or feeling about it. Like, you're just going to learn this. And we think that those reps are really, really important. And one thing we're really excited about building in the new year.
It'll really be interesting too. I saw that the selections were, and this is just Jill spouting off, I saw the selections were medicine focused. I think it'll be interesting as you continue to build out the different modules, trauma focused, veteran in battle, domestic violence, child sexual abuse, building out those different couples therapy. I think it'll be really interesting, suicidality, that I would be able to experience and practice with somebody, with a chatbot that is showing me this kind of behavior, so that, God forbid, I see it in real life, I can be prepared for it. I have not worked with couples. There has been a question that came up a few months ago, and I referred, because I don't have that experience. What a really interesting opportunity for me to say, I would love to learn about working with couples. So I think there's, as you continue to expand the content and expand the learning opportunities, it's so vast. It's so vast.
Well, it's many different metrics as well, right? We want to be able to have you be able to go into a menu and say, I want this type of person. It could be gender, sexual orientation, history, et cetera. This persona with this history, with this drug that took this dose, it's having this counterindication, and you can imagine, right? If you just start that matrix like that, we're talking about thousands of permutations. Our limitation right now is that we are solely trained on the support line data. But we are having conversations, and we would invite anybody in from any other specialty or research group that has this data about, let's collectively come up with data sets that we can train across these. And when we find partners that we trust can help us develop that, we're absolutely willing to do that. And again, so it's by topic and specialty, but also in any iteration that come up, because we know that only 6 or 7% of Americans report that their mental health support is working for them. And so we have a very, very large ceiling to grow into about how to do this better. And I think that if we can find more good sources of data, find more good communities to tell us whether or not it's working before we put it out into the world, and then learn from when it is working at the sort of 95 to 99% level, I think we're going to find that we can collectively raise that number up just as one community using one technology.
We have a pretty broad audience base.
Sure.
For those facilitators out there who are saying, I think I could help. Obviously, we'll have all your contact information in the show notes, but
Right.
What would, again, English major, what would data look like? Would it be their experience? Would it be written notes? See, English major.
Yep. Yeah,
what would
totally.
it look like?
I mean, ideally it would be audio and video, just because there's so much to be learned right now. I mean, we're submitting for a grant right now where we think we're going to be able to track biomarkers and voices about whether or not somebody is going to have, not in real time, but is about to have a rupture in the relationship with their therapist or a breakthrough. Because there are things that are sub-perceptible in changes in people's voice that you and we might pick up in the back of our head, like something's going on here, but the technology is actually able to find it beforehand. And so we want to just make sure that, we're driving towards, not gathering knowledge. So what do we really need to do that? We need data, voice and video would be next. There's another stuff about facial. There's a bunch of facial technology now where you can read people's resting heart rate or changes in their heart rate just by an image of their face. And there's a lot of new markers there. So audio and video would be number one. Clinical notes to support that, or even as a facilitator, notes around an individual. And we have the technology now where before we see it, you can submit it to a server, have it fully anonymized and de-identified before it even comes to us, so that you feel like you can maintain trust. Obviously, you still need to have consent with the population that you're working with before you do that. But that would be key. I think beyond that, communities of practice are going to be key as well, because audio, video, and then being able to evaluate it and what makes sense within that context is the other piece that we're looking for.
I think the message I'm hearing is, if we have facilitators or treat leaders who are interested in contributing here, reach out to you folks, really understand the landscape of what would be required in terms of consent from their clients, from themselves, so they go in fully informed before they kind of jump in and say, oh, I want to be a part of this. But I have a funny feeling there's certainly a population, myself included, who would love to, in some way, shape, or form, help if we can. So I will definitely have your information in the show notes for that.
Great. Yeah, and we're really excited. We've been contacted by folks in Australia and Canada and several countries in Europe already, and saying, look, we've done this clinical trial. We've had this recording. That's great. Or, some people get consent in the underground just to make sure that there's safety, and or they can review the notes with their clients. If you go back to your clients and say, look, would you be okay with this? This is the steps we're going to take, and we can build that trust. We'd love that information, because we're clinically focused and or psychedelic support focused because of the data we have from the line. We are hoping to go full range, with this, so that no matter your context, your geography, how you identify, we can create scenarios that are helpful for you.
Yeah, and appropriate. All right. I do like to keep the pod. I could probably talk to you for another hour. I do like to keep the
part two at some point.
Kind of digestible. I was just about to say, would you mind maybe in 6 months if we could revisit and see where things are and kind of have an update? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think the other group that would be really helpful is if you have a training program in any context and you're willing to really figure out how this could potentially fit in, that's a really important avenue for us as well, because, we know what feels authentic to us. We don't know what feels right for your community, and building those type of partnerships is also really key to us.
Great. Wonderful. David, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I love what you're doing. We need experienced, qualified, safe facilitators, practitioners in the field. We do not have enough of them. I think what you folks are trying to do is phenomenal. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Psychedelic Scene podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with David from the Fireside Project. Coming from an educational background, I think any technology that can be used to effectively scale to train facilitators is a necessary conversation to have at this point. The reality is there is a demand for qualified facilitators in this space. And so maybe this is one of the ways that it can get done. I am at least hopeful that AI can be used for good, and this seems to be a fantastic use case. So if you like this kind of content, head on over to psychedelicscene.com, where we have a whole bunch of other interesting psychedelic culture content too. And if you like that content, consider buying Jason, our founder, a little cup of coffee, because he is the one who keeps the lights on. And so with that said, until next time, take care.